History is not just a record of events, it's a narrative shaped by those who wield power. But what happens when these storytellers twist the truth, rewriting the past to serve their own ends? Today, we unearth the tales of three leaders who didn't just shape history, they manipulated it. Brace yourselves as we delve into the shadowy depths of history's greatest deceivers. The last one will leave you speechless. Our journey begins in China, where Mao Zedong's vision of communism transformed the nation, but at an unimaginable cost. To understand Mao's manipulation of history, we must first explore his rise to power. The Long March of 1934 to 1935, a strategic retreat by the Communist Party of China, CPC, from the nationalist forces, was later glorified in Maoist propaganda as a heroic struggle. In official accounts, Mao was portrayed as the mastermind of this epic journey, a symbol of the CPC's indomitable spirit. But the truth is more complex. Mao's role was not as pivotal as later claimed. Other leaders like Zhu De and Zhou Enlai played crucial roles, but were overshadowed by Mao's narrative. Once the communists established their base in Yan'an, Mao began to solidify his control over the party. Through a combination of political maneuvering and ruthless purges, like the Rectification Campaign of 1942, Mao eliminated rivals and dissenters, ensuring that his version of events would dominate. It was here that Mao began crafting the myth of his own infallibility. In 1949, the People's Republic of China was born, and Mao was its undisputed leader. His immediate goal was to transform China into a socialist state, and he launched the first of many mass campaigns, the land reform movement. Millions of landlords were publicly tried and executed, their lands redistributed to the peasants. Officially, this was portrayed as a great victory for the oppressed, but the violence and chaos of the campaign were carefully omitted from the record. Next came the Great Leap Forward, Mao's ambitious plan to rapidly industrialize China and collectivize agriculture. Propaganda depicted it as a miraculous transformation, factories rising overnight, communes producing record harvests. But the reality was starkly different. The Great Leap Forward led to one of the deadliest famines in human history. Between 1958 and 1962, an estimated 30 to 45 million people died from starvation and forced labor. Local officials, fearing punishment, falsified production figures, which in turn led to even more unrealistic quotas and further suffering. Yet, Mao and the CPC suppressed the truth, blaming rightist elements and natural disasters for the catastrophe. In 1966, Mao launched the Cultural Revolution, a campaign to reassert his control and purge the party of bourgeois elements. But it was also a deliberate attempt to reshape history. The youth of China, the Red Guards, were mobilized to destroy the four olds: old customs, old culture, old habits and old ideas. This was not just a political movement, it was an assault on history itself. Ancient texts were burned, temples desecrated, and intellectuals humiliated, imprisoned or killed. The Cultural Revolution also saw the spread of Mao's cult of personality to unprecedented heights. The Little Red Book, a collection of Mao's quotes, became a sacred text. Every classroom, factory and commune was required to display Mao's portrait and study his words. Dissent was equated with treason, and those who remembered a different China were silenced. Mao's version of history became the only version enshrined in textbooks and enforced by the state. Mao's manipulation of history wasn't just about creating a legacy. It was about erasing all others. His purges and campaigns claimed millions of lives, but his control over the narrative ensured that his role was portrayed as that of a benevolent, visionary leader. The truth was buried beneath layers of propaganda, only beginning to emerge after his death in 1976. But the story of historical manipulation doesn't end here. From the orchestrated chaos of China, we now turn to the heart of Africa, where a king's greed would be masked by the illusion of civilization. Our next stop is the Congo Free State, a vast territory in Central Africa that became the personal fiefdom of King Leopold II of Belgium. To the world, Leopold portrayed himself as a benevolent monarch on a civilizing mission. But behind this facade was a regime of unimaginable brutality. Leopold's acquisition of the Congo began at the Berlin Conference, where European powers carved up Africa with little regard for the indigenous peoples. Leopold claimed the Congo under the guise of humanitarianism, presenting it as a philanthropic endeavor to end the slave trade and bring Christianity and modernity to the region. But his true intentions were far more sinister. Leopold established the Congo Free State in 1885, and for the next 2 decades, he exploited its resources with ruthless efficiency. Rubber and ivory were extracted through a system of forced labor that subjected millions of Congolese to horrific conditions. Quotas for rubber were enforced with violence. Those who failed to meet them were often whipped, mutilated, or killed. One of the most notorious aspects of Leopold's regime was the practice of collecting severed hands as proof that bullets were not wasted. The severed hands became a grim currency, a symbol of the brutal efficiency with which Leopold's men operated. The true scale of the atrocities committed in the Congo is difficult to quantify, but it's estimated that up to 10 million people perished as a result of Leopold's policies. While these atrocities were taking place, Leopold waged a propaganda campaign in Europe to maintain his image as a great philanthropist. He funded exhibitions, published books, and lobbied governments to support his so-called civilizing mission. Statues were erected in his honor, and he was praised as a hero in Belgian society. Meanwhile, the truth was carefully hidden, with journalists and critics silenced or bribed. But the truth eventually began to leak out, thanks to the efforts of activists like E.D. Morel and Roger Casement. Morel, a British journalist, exposed the discrepancy between the wealth flowing into Belgium from the Congo and the lack of legitimate trade, revealing the forced labor and exploitation at the heart of Leopold's regime. Casement, a British consul, documented the atrocities in his Congo report, which shocked the world and galvanized a movement for reform. As the international outcry grew, Leopold was forced to cede control of the Congo to the Belgian state in 1908. Although this marked the end of his personal rule, the damage had been done. Leopold had amassed a vast fortune at the cost of millions of lives, and his carefully crafted image as a benevolent ruler remained intact in many circles for years to come. Leopold died in 1909, never facing justice for his crimes. His legacy remains controversial. While his statues still stand in Belgium, many now recognize the horrific reality of his rule. The story of the Congo Free State is a stark reminder of how power can be wielded to distort the truth and obscure the darkest chapters of history. Our final chapter takes us to the Soviet Union, where one man perfected the art of erasing history itself. A leader whose paranoia knew no bounds and whose methods of control extended beyond the grave. We end our journey in the Soviet Union, where Joseph Stalin's reign was marked not only by widespread terror, but by an insidious rewriting of history. Stalin rose to power in the aftermath of the Russian Revolution, and by the late 1920s, he had consolidated his control over the Communist Party. But his real mastery lay in his ability to manipulate the past to secure his future. During the Bolshevik Revolution, figures like Leon Trotsky played crucial roles in the overthrow of the Tsarist regime and the establishment of Soviet power. Trotsky, in particular, was one of the most prominent leaders, serving as the head of the Red Army and a close ally of Lenin. But after Lenin's death in 1924, Stalin moved quickly to eliminate his rivals, with Trotsky being one of the first to fall. Stalin's rise to power was accompanied by a systematic campaign to erase his enemies from history. Trotsky, once a hero of the revolution, became a non-person. His contributions were downplayed or omitted from Soviet history books, and his image was literally erased from photographs. Stalin's version of the revolution was rewritten to cast himself as Lenin's closest confidant and the true leader of the Soviet state. The Great Purge of the late 1930s was one of Stalin's most infamous campaigns, targeting anyone he perceived as a threat to his power. Hundreds of thousands of party members, military leaders and ordinary citizens were arrested, tortured and executed. But Stalin's purges weren't just about eliminating rivals, they were about rewriting history. Those who were purged were often airbrushed out of official photographs, their names removed from records, their existence denied. Stalin's rewriting of history was so thorough that entire events were reinterpreted or fabricated to suit his narrative. For example, the story of the October Revolution was edited to diminish the roles of others and elevate Stalin's contribution. Revolutionary heroes like Kamenev and Zinoviev, who had once stood by Lenin's side, were removed from the historical record after their execution during the purges. Propaganda played a central role in Stalin's manipulation of history. His image was omnipresent, depicted as the great leader and father of nations. School children were taught to revere him, and his version of history was presented as absolute truth. Anyone who questioned this narrative risked their life. By the time of Stalin's death in 1953, the Soviet Union had been remade in his image, with the past carefully curated to glorify his rule. But the facade couldn't last forever. In 1956, 3 years after Stalin's death, Nikita Khrushchev shocked the Soviet Union with his secret speech, where he denounced Stalin's purges and the cult of personality. This speech marked the beginning of de-Stalinization, an effort to dismantle the myth of Stalin and restore some semblance of truth to Soviet history. Statues of Stalin were torn down, his name removed from cities, and his crimes slowly brought to light. Stalin's legacy, like those of Mao and Leopold, serves as a grim reminder of how those in power can twist the truth to serve their own ends. His manipulation of history was so profound that its effects are still felt today, as scholars and historians continue to unravel the tangled web of lies that he left behind. Three leaders, three nations, three histories rewritten. Mao, Leopold, Stalin, each left a mark on history, not just through their actions, but through the stories they constructed to justify them. As we uncover the truth, we're reminded of the fragility of history and the importance of questioning the narratives handed down to us. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the dark side of history. Remember, the truth is out there, but it's up to us to find it. If you found this exploration of history's manipulators intriguing, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the past. History may be written by the victors, but the truth can never be fully erased.